Folks, welcome along to a special edition of Talking Pace, the Restorative Conversations podcast from Northern Ireland Alternatives. We bit of a different feel to this today. It's Restorative Justice Week, and in light of that, we are joined by members of Restorative Cleveland, based in England, and we're going to have a bit of a conversation today around repair and harm. But before we get into that, folks, why don't we go ahead and just introduce ourselves and let anybody who may be watching this know who you are.
Hi, I'm Becky Childs. I'm the service manager over at Restorative Cleveland. We cover a varied area in Teesside, including rural, coastal and inner city. So a really interesting place to work, and it's a pleasure to be here today.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Debbie Hamill. I'm Operations Manager for Northern Ireland Alternatives. Similar to Restorative Justice Cleveland, we work across inner city and rural and coastal areas.
Hello, my name is Paul Shaw. I'm an accredited practitioner for Restorative Cleveland, and we work in the Cleveland area, but also joint partnership working in the Northeast in general.
I'm Nicola Jason. I'm a restorative justice practitioner working in the courts within the Cleveland area, dealing with probation office, mainly obtaining referrals from them for offenders coming through the court service.
Hi, I'm Beth Hunter. I am a restorative justice practitioner, but I primarily focus on a project called the Real Me Project, which is aimed towards young offenders aged 17 to 25, looking at transition periods in their life from youth justice to probation, so we work quite closely with those, and basically looking at how we use restorative approaches with our young people to try and create that community and family connection that's going to reduce the cycle of reoffending.
Hi, my name is Salma Castle. I'm also a Real Me project practitioner. I work alongside Beth Hunter as well on the same project.
Brilliant. And my name's Glenn Miller, and I am the training manager here at Northern Ireland Alternatives. I'm responsible for developing and continuing to improve those services across all of our sites in Northern Ireland. Folks are absolutely welcome on the conversation today. Obviously, I've already said the theme is around the idea of repair and harm. And repair and harm is obviously an essential element in regards to any restorative process. It's the ultimate end goal, is how do we work together with participants to ensure that harm is repaired in some shape or form. Just want to open it up to everyone to kind of talk about what that concept kind of means to you, because it's whenever we use things like repair and harm, it seems dead straightforward, but to maybe those outside of the field and stuff, we start talking about things like that there, and it could conjure up all sorts of stuff. Maybe it'd be good for us to chat first and foremost about what our thoughts are about that. Maybe back, if I start with you, is that all right in terms of what comes to your mind when you think about the concept of repair and harm?
Yeah, sure, Glenn. I think one of the things that was really important certainly to me, managing the service is that we thought more broadly about what that meant in people's lives. So we didn't just think about the person that's being harmed and the person that's caused the harm. We considered other individuals that might have been affected by the offence that's being committed on both sides. Certainly looking at the hidden harm of offending in relation to perhaps like, I don't know, drinking offences where somebody's been drunk and disorderly, might have had an incident in a bar, for example. We get that quite a lot. They might have been asked to leave the bar. There might have been an altercation with bar staff, people at the door in terms of security, police officers, any emergency workers present there. So we want to just ensure that if anybody's been affected, that we can incorporate them within that incident, as well as the direct victim of that, if there is one. Obviously, in drunken disorderly offences, there often aren't anybody that's been named by that. And then we also want to take that into restoration with the community where that's possible. So we do quite often try to incorporate somebody's reintegration, not just within their personal relationships, their immediate relationships, but with the community that they're likely to go back and be part of but hopefully in a more pro-social way that works for both parties. You know, there's often a lot of distrust or negative attitudes towards somebody who's committed an offence, and then for them to be put back in that same place and expected to carry on as if nothing's happened can be challenging for both sides.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. We'll delve into some of the finer aspects of that in a wee second. But maybe, Debbie, what about you? Whenever you kind of think of this concept of repairing harm, what are the things that come to your mind?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Becky was saying there, I suppose in terms of the work of alternatives has expanded so much in terms of who we're connecting with and who we are identifying as being a harmed party and a responsible party. And I suppose just by nature, restorative justice and restorative practice has traditionally been looked upon as being the softer touch. Okay, it's been looked upon as being a bit, you know, how do we really hold people accountable and help them to identify the harm that they've caused, and then looking at obviously how you're repairing that. And one of the things for me has been about, if we're not repairing the harm that the offender or perpetrator or responsible party is affected by first, we can't, I don't think, go down that road or down that path where we're asking them to repair harm for who they have hurt.
Mm.
So initially, and it's been a criticism that we have faced, and it's something that we stand by a lot, is that when somebody's been involved in a situation where there's been a negative impact, it's about repairing the harm to the person who's caused that harm first and foremost, and putting them on their own individual journey, and then moving it forward into, I suppose, looking at the creative methods. And I know we're going to speak about that in a bit in terms of engagement, etc. But there's not a lot of other methodologies or approaches for a restorative approach that actually allows you to do that. And I'm going to give an example. A few years ago, Glenn and I went into a local prison here. They don't call the guys in there prisoners, they call them students. And we were in delivering a piece of training, got chatting with some of the guys, and we were asking them what their impact was on their offence towards their victim, who they felt that they'd been or who they had harmed, because we were leading into this conversation about repairing the harm. They'd never been asked that question before. So they were already inside the formal justice system, and we were the first people as restorative practitioners to ask them how they felt their victims had been impacted. And that was a real eye-opener for me in terms of engagement and how you start the process. So for me, it's right back to basics to the initial offence or action or behaviour.
Yeah, no, it brings in that kind of the concept of responsibility. How can you take responsibility elsewhere whenever you haven't really taken responsibility for some of the things yourself? And I think that's, you know, part of the rationale behind getting involved in a process or progressing a process, that there's this idea of taking responsibility. What about I'm going to call you I'm going to keep calling you the trio. What about up there? Anything you want to add up there when you're in my top right? I don't know where you'll be on the screen for everybody else, but anything you want to add to what's been said already?
Yeah, personally, I think from when I first started this journey in restorative approaches, restorative justice, I realised that I was dealing with a lot of similar index offences, but learned quickly not to be laissez-faire about the impact that it might have on someone. So you could get the same offences, but it could have completely different impacts and harm caused. And so it was really getting down on hearing a victim's voice of what harm and what solutions that they might want to come out of a process. Taking that further, when we think about those people who have committed offences that have received a custodial sentence, there's a presumption that the criminal justice system has done its work. That person's locked up for a period. If we're taking an offence like ABH or really serious offences, the fact is that those people will serve half the sentence. If they haven't had that opportunity within the custodial setting to carry out victim awareness, you're already playing catch up. But even those, unless there's the voice of those impacted on in that offence, and we're talking secondary ripple effect victims, including the community, there can be a real tendency for offenders to feel quite anxious about going out back in the community if that's not being addressed, or they haven't had the opportunity to understand how it has impacted on the direct victim and those in the community. And we've had several cases here in Restorative Cleveland where that has been evident, but going through the process, they've come up to an agreement above and beyond all those exclusion zones, which don't last forever. But as we always say, we live in a small world, and the chances of bumping into someone just outside that exclusion zone, what does that look like? Will that then re-traumatize both parties? Same for the victim. Will the victim's friends, if they see that person, then think for retribution? So it can have wider impacts, but it can also inform risk and really listening to the harm to give everyone that equal opportunity to share that, understand it, and agree a way forward.
Yeah, that's brilliant. No, thanks very much. Anybody else want to contribute in on there, just in terms of just getting our idea of this concept of repairing harm?
I think something that Debbie said actually really resonated with me is this idea of kind of repairing harm almost to the individual before they can even necessarily acknowledge that there is an impact to that. A lot of the young people we work with had so much trauma and a significant distrust of a lot of professionals. And the idea of giving back to a community that they feel has never really had their best interests at heart just becomes quite an unproductive cycle, especially with a lot of people who've been involved early in the criminal justice system, where maybe repair looks like reparations that have been imposed by the courts, and there's never really been that addressing of what is happening for that individual through those trauma-informed approaches. And I think it really is sort of building that relationship with that person who then potentially will actually, once they've done a lot of that kind of individual and internal reflecting, and the concept that doing harm to somebody else as a harmed individual is not a cold, neutral feeling. There is something that they do want to give back. And so I think, that kind of repairing harm almost has to be done through the relationship building work with the young people before you can then start thinking, right, how do we look outwards and sort of reflect that in a positive way.
Yeah, no, completely agree there. Because if there is no any kind of positive relationship or any time of connection, then the action of repairing harm sometimes or moving into that can kind of lose its impact, which is not what you want. You want it to have a greater impact as a result of that, and good relationships, you're pointing out there, Beth, is definitely the foundation for making that type of lasting impact. Anybody else want to add something in there just before we move on and look at some of maybe the challenges that there are when we get to the idea of trying to work with people to come up with things to repair harm?
I'd just like to say that we've had a few cases of late where in the court the victim's personal statement hasn't been read out in court, that the judges read it in chambers, or it hasn't been read out aloud, so the offender is completely unaware of the harm that they have caused to the victim, and then that also leaves the victim feeling disappointed and neglected, really. The fact that they've taken the time to give that statement and it hasn't been read out, which is the whole purpose, to outline the harm to the offender and for the judge to make a decision on the sentencing, which I think is quite important.
No, I think you're right there, especially in terms of any court process where there's the potential for a victim impact statement to be read out, and regardless of whether a restorative process has been offered or not. I think it's important that that's included. And I know that was probably one of the things that came out, just recollecting, Paul, whenever we had the podcast, well, in terms of there was an acknowledgement that that what do you call it, the responsible party in this instance hadn't actually heard the victim impact statement. They had actually been taken away from the camera in the prison, and they didn't hear it, and so on. So I definitely think that's it's important to have somewhere along the line, regardless of, as I say, whether there's a restorative process in place or not, that if there's the mechanism for responsible parties to hear about their impact, then we should definitely be looking to ensure that happens, because that we know that can have a massive impact on people going forward when they hear those type of things. You know what I mean? So, Sam, I don't want to leave you out there, but do you want to maybe add something in there?
Mainly what Paul really said about how it impacts the community and the ripple effect. I'm working with a lot of young people who maybe coming out of just in from the prison or places where the young people have offended have gone in, and they've basically saying to me, oh, they've got a record, or the police are on them, and they've come from a culture where they accept not violence, but the way they have been brought up has an impact on how they are in the community. So they see like smashing somebody's window in is a normal thing to get revenge, but they don't understand the repercussions of that and how it could impact them personally a long term in terms of employment, other things that they might want to do. Because like my mum did it, my so and so did it. So the ripple effect, even though they've been in prison or they've had that custodial sentence to come out, and they'll think, well, everybody else is to do, I'm going to do the same. So what I tend to do is more interventions so that they don't do that again, and just break that cycle, if you like, of thinking that it's okay to go back and to do something else as a revenge, if you like. So I have to change that mindset with them, really. That's what I tend to do with them. But there is a culture there.
And that's a nice segue, I suppose, into the idea of a challenge of repair and harm, isn't it? Because, you know, what people consider to be the norms in terms of their own sense of community, or what they consider to be where they live, etc., can sometimes have this impact on, well, as you say, something that this is normality. This is the way it's the way things are. What do you mean this isn't right? You know, it's all they know. And I suppose that's a challenge that we face as workers, is, you know, is the background and the culture, the participants who come on the restorative process have actually been a part of. And that's something I think that's really embedded in what we do, Debbie, you know, in terms of the, you know, and the culture that's existed in Northern Ireland for a long period of time has been this idea that you seek revenge, you seek some form of summary justice in order to try and solve your problems. And as a result of that, we end up just inflicting more harm in the community. And I think that's, you know, and even then, even when because I think that's a great point, Tom, because when you ask some people, you know, what motivated their behavior, what was going on with you, they can't tell you. It's like, oh, I don't know, you know, and you know, I don't know what was going on in my head whenever you know the classic restorative question, what was going through your head when, you know, or what were you thinking about at the time? And a lot of times you get absolutely nothing. I was just thinking about, you know, I'm going to do this and that's it, you know, and the impact at the end is completely lost on it, you know. So in terms of challenges, then, well, that's one, maybe culture, background, and cultural norms is one challenge. Maybe what I'll do is I'll maybe go to Debbie next and say, Debbie, what would you say are some of the challenges that we face as restorative practitioners in trying to enable not just responsible parties, but also harm parties in regards to the idea of what can be done to repair harm?
Right. One of the things that just came to mind there when Salma was speaking there was around this notion about reintegration. It's a big issue for us here within our communities, particularly it's part of the legacy of the conflict that we still have here, whereby if somebody has committed certain offences, they're still looked upon really, really badly. There's still a real stigma attached to some of those. For example, robbing pensioners, breaking into certain people's houses, things like that. And becoming more so as well would be what Paul mentioned earlier on around hate crime as well.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I find particularly challenging about this is around reintegrating people within communities. And Glenn will have heard me saying this before. Reintegration is assuming that the person was integrated in their society and their community in the first place. And I think that there's a discussion that needs to be had. Were they really? Because if they were really integrated within their community, would they have maybe carried out the actions, the behaviour that they did? And sometimes I think the answer is no more than yes. And for us, the challenge usually has been that when somebody is working really hard to make a difference and to show that they're making the effort to repair that harm, it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of effort. There's a lot of work that gets done from alternatives that's really done below the radar, because quite a lot of the issues we're dealing with are very sensitive. We can't run out and let everybody within the streets know that we're working with X, Y, and Z, and that we want to reintegrate them back into certain communities. You've got to manage that, and you've got to negotiate it, and you've got to feel your way through. So whereas communities want to see the quick win nearly sometimes, and they want to see something that's very visible, that's been done in terms of repairing harm. And sometimes you have to make sure that you keep going back. So to summarize that, I suppose it's around looking at this notion of reintegration and what that looks and feels like for people. And the other one around is a challenge about communication. How do we make sure that we're communicating with the right people at the right times, with the right information, to make sure that whenever that path and that foundation is laid for people to start repairing the harm, that we're not setting them up to fail. I suppose I'm talking about the harder end cases here, but we do not want to be setting people up to fall.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there, and I know I was in a group there recently where we're talking about the idea of reframing things in regards to the restorative process, and one of the things that they were talking about was is there the potential of changing that fifth R of reintegration to something like reconciliation, in terms of they'll being reconciled to your community rather than being reintegrated, because in some instances going back into the community that you came from may not be even a possibility. But the idea of reconciling is something that we do, but that's for another episode. Beth, don't want to land you in it, but is there anything you'd want to go out in as a challenge? You're obviously working on your project. There may be some stuff that you may find a challenge in terms of the people you're working with, in terms of getting them to either embrace the concept or coming up with ideas in terms of repairing harm.
Yeah, I think one of the big things for us, especially with the younger ones, because although we don't reach 25, the vast majority of people that we work with at the moment are at that sort of 17, 18, 19, is just this concept that there is no other way, that it's this generational, like Salma was saying, a lot of sort of generational incidences, and the fact that they're perhaps either feel too involved in the crime that they've already committed, and that the repercussions if they turned away from that peer group could be too significant for them. The idea that they're at 18 now, they're an adult, they know this is just the direction that their life has to be. And so I'd say the biggest kind of challenge is finding that future, that positive future that looks different, that vision of something and a future for themselves that hasn't already been preordained, has been quite tricky. And it's sort of sparking for them what might be, because, a lot of them, some of them do, but a lot of them don't maybe have children, don't have something tacit that they can hold on to, that they see as their vision for, or their inspiration for moving forward. So it's about us trying to inspire that, find an interest, find a passion, find something that they're interested in that could spark off that shift that makes them see a different future for themselves. And I think that's that kind of concept of that generational issue. And sometimes as well, the community just sees them as young yobs who they're going to carry on like that for the rest of their life, and there's no other way forward. So also fighting sometimes some of that community image just of them as hoodie wearing thugs that ride around on bikes and hang around outside of shops. So I think it's sort of, just helping them see a different future for themselves that isn't just influenced by either generational issues or a community understanding that this is just the way they're always going to be. I think that's what we work on primarily.
Love that. I think the idea of working towards somebody's strengths and skills is definitely really important, because as you say, if something's enforced on someone, or the suggestion of something to add into a plan is not really coming from them, and it's not really linked to their skills. And I think that goes back and forth with what Debbie was saying as well, Beth, in regards to this idea we don't want to set anybody up to fail. We ask them to do something that's maybe outside of their skill set. We're going to reinforce this idea that you're no good, you're not, what you contribute is not of value and stuff. And I think that we need to be very careful about that. But this idea of working towards someone's strengths and using those, how do we creatively use those to come up with ideas to get that? Because that's one of the things as a training manager, I look at the whole idea, people will really engage with something if they're interested and invested in it. And it doesn't matter how you give them the information or whatever, but if you're really invested in something, or something has really captured your imagination and your attention, then you'll do whatever it takes to kind of either find out more or do something about that. And I was talking with a young on Monday night, and he was talking to me a bit about it. How he was he didn't do well at school, hated reading, and funnily enough, I'd suggested a book for him to read, and I knew the subject would get him. Would really grab him, and he come back. We were going on a bit of a walk and stuff, and he started talking to me. He says that book's brilliant, and I says, right. I says, this is coming from someone who says they're not a good reader. And he's like going, I wonder, well, why did you say? I says, because it's something you're interested in. I says, it's amazing, what time and effort you'll put into something if you're really invested in it. And if we can take notice of that, then as a practitioner, that's a major win for us. Do you know what I mean? So brilliant. That's a great point. Is there anybody else want to add anything in there?
Just to add on, it's about changing people's mindsets as well. If they've been, like I said, intergenerational thinking, the way they're thinking, that my parent, as I said, they reflect on what happened before, and everybody else in the family did it that way. So, like Debbie was saying, it's like doing the work with them, but it takes a long time. But if you can do the right interventions and change that mindset, that person might hold on to something, like you said, an interest, and might direct them in the positive pathway to a mindset changing as well. I think that's the key as well.
Yeah,
I would say.
completely. Brilliant. Anyone else? Are we good? All good. No worries. Well, then what I'll move into then is some of the more creative ways that maybe we've explored in terms of trying to come up with or help participants on a restorative process come up with some. I suppose we've already intimated one-on-ones about trying to find out strengths in terms of that they have and skills that they have. What other creative ways have you encountered? Obviously being mindful of what you share here in regards to some of those things, but what are some of the more creative ways that you've encountered in your work in terms of either responsible parties or harm parties suggesting that this would be a great way for someone to repair the harm or for them to repair the harm? I'll open that up to anybody who wants to go for it.
I think one of the best ones that we ever came across was a young lady with learning disabilities who was being the victim of hate crime every single time she got on the bus. And the bus that she needed to get went into the town centre, but she would end up avoiding the school kind of pick up and drop off times because it was just too much for her. It was really distressing in terms of what was happening to her on the bus. So it got brought up at one of the local hate crime strategy meetings, and her learning disability advocate fed this back, and everybody around the table was kind of talking about what on earth they could do to support it. And in the end, we did a recorded message from her speaking about what was happening and what she would like to happen. And she spoke so beautifully. I mean, she was very distressed when she spoke about it during the meeting, understandably, because every time the mere subject of it came up, she would burst into tears. So while she wanted to come face to face with some of those school children, and it was largely school children, we just felt that would be setting her up to fail. So she was very, very good at explaining that with support. So we felt responsively that to do that with a recorded message, we linked in with the police liaison officer that went into the schools and did work and sessions with the young people there. And he incorporated her video with her permission within his package. So that video ended up being rolled out across lots of different schools in that area. So her voice was heard so far reaching, really. We just felt it was incredible, but it didn't stop there. The local bus company that she'd been traveling on actually had a hate crime advocate based within their team, which again is just very forward thinking, we felt. And they were very happy with a lot of planning to include our logos and a message challenging the incidence of hate crime, and in kind of in a really reframing that language though. So it was something really kind of I guess more solution focused, like, you know, you kind of reminding people of their rights to travel peacefully, but also that, you know, if you encounter something, there is a means that you can challenge that discreetly. So it was on the Coven internally within 80 of the new buses that just recently launched, and they did the whole fleet of buses. They replaced everything, and it had the police contact on there, our logos, the victim care service that we operate as well. It was just fantastic. And they made such a fuss. She was able to kind of come in and like see the buses. The police car kind of tore into our cul-de-sac where our office is one day with the sirens and the lights going, and she was just she got to go out for the day in the police car, and it was just anything that made her feel special and reinforce that traveling is actually fun, and there's people out here that value and respect you and want you to feel part of this community, and whilst challenging the attitudes and I guess the thinking that comes around some of those underlying beliefs that can, I guess, lead people to say things that with some education they might not ordinarily say. That was very much her aim. She just wanted to educate. And so with a bit of creativity and some fantastic partnership working, I think we managed to do that for her, which is it's just brilliant. That's how it should be, I think.
Yeah. Brilliant. Maybe take one more example, folks. Are just unconscious. We're probably about 5 or 6 minutes left in the time that we'll have here. We'll take maybe one more example, and then we'll do a wee bit of an end thing, and just to maybe take a few thoughts from people about how we ensure that the idea of coming up with things for restorative plans remains a collaborative process and is not primarily driven by the practitioner. So maybe someone does have an example, go ahead, share, and then we'll do that at the end off, if that's all right.
Right, oh, sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead, Paul.
No, I was just going to add to what Becky said there, that they also on that video, they incorporated with the driver training. So any new drivers will be shown that video to help them how to respond to a perceived incident or something happening. And for every 3 years, the license renewal. And I forgot to mention to Becky last week, I actually bumped into the school liaison officer who recognised me from that time. So it's a few years ago now, and he said the kids love her video and really sit and listen to it. So yeah, sorry, Debbie.
Oh, brilliant.
Becky, that's one of the nicest things I have ever heard, honestly, in terms of impact that will have, in terms of creativity, in terms of the amount of people that won't even think that they've needed to hear that message, and they'll have heard it. Honestly, that's just really lovely, really, really lovely. An example just I'll give in terms of from the perspective of supposed offenders, to use that term very loosely, would be that we had a cohort of young people that would have just, they weren't really involved in the local youth club, etc., and they would have the very typical hanging around the streets, kicking their footballs up against gable walls, etc. And one of the things nowadays is that everything seems to be antisocial behaviour. Like, see, when I was young, we played in the street. You know, you played outside until it got dark. And nowadays it sort of seems, I think, that young people get a really bit of a hard time. And they're not pushed to utilise the amenities and facilities really just within their area and their community. So this group of lads were being targeted, etc. There was a lot of negative things being put on social media around them, which was very harmful. And could have potentially really escalated quite a small scenario into something much larger because they were being accused of doing things that they actually weren't involved in. So we thought, when we talked about earlier about visibility, how do we make what they do, the good parts, visible? So we did a photographic exhibition. We called it Loud and Proud. And we had members of the team, and they interviewed each of the young people. And the interview started off, for example, by saying, tell me what you've achieved in school. You know, and the normal reaction is nothing, never achieved anything. Okay, have you ever been on the local football team? Did you play the basketball team? Did you? And they started to say yes. And then we were saying, look, these are achievements. You know, did you get a school report? Did you get something good in the comments? Did you achieve a grade that you wanted to do? Then we escalated that up into their contribution within volunteering within their community. whether they would pull their granny's bin down the bottom of the pathway, whether or not they got somebody a pint of milk, all those smaller things. So we wrote them up in terms of a storyboard for them. We got their portraits done, framed, and then alongside it, we had this, I suppose, narrative, their story in their words about what they were doing that was positive, because quite often you only ever hear about what they do wrong, not what they do right. And we displayed it in the local community centre. We did a big launch, we made a big fuss of them, we got their families in to see it, etc. And we kept it up for about 3 months, and then we moved it into another community centre, which here would have been, you know, within a different religious community, and we hosted it in there as well. So that was very significant for the young people, not only to have their stories showcased and highlighted within their own community, but within a different area as well.
Brilliant.
I'm not topping yours, Becky, though, but I'll add that one.
Listen, I think it's all about, you know,
Amazing.
yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's all about that creative aspect, you know, and again, responding to need. And I suppose that, Debbie, that's a really nice kind of way to, you know, circle back to what you started talking about at the very beginning, about the idea of taking responsibility for your own kind of actions, and, you know, and before you but recognizing that there is something that's good in you and that you have something to contribute is still an integral part of that as a process. So just in terms of ending off, folks, how do we keep this a collaborative process? How do we keep this being something that's done in partnership? When we talk even about the social discipline window, how do we stay in the with window in terms of getting to the point of helping people come up with ideas and stuff that are geared towards the idea of repairing harm? I don't know, Becky, you looking to come in there, or?
You know, I just really think it comes down to that whole premise of strengths-based working and being solution focused and reframing into more positive language, because if you're very careful about the way that you speak and how you truly listen and hear, then you will learn so many wonderful things about people that sometimes they haven't heard enough of to recognize it as a strength in themselves. And I think Debbie's example beautifully captures that. It's actually something that we've really wanted to kind of pick up on in Teesside through an art exhibition that we're doing, with where there's more. Well, the idea is there's more facets to somebody than that horrible raw moment you get, that snapshot of somebody at the point an offence has been happened, and it's very easy for that then to increase people's fear of crime and to make judgments and to misconceptions around who somebody is and what their future could be. So in order to really stay with somebody, I think we really need to see more of that person and the different sides of their personality, and really focus on reinforcing the good and the drive that can be in there.
Yeah, no, definitely. We take one more and then we'll wrap things up, folks.
Well, I just think in recent light of the news stories, and certainly potentially in Cleveland, is about getting perpetrators of crime in big yellow jackets, cleaning streets and making that, and that's repairing the harm to the community. I think that's very short-sighted. It may be a vote catcher, but actually what does that do? What does that do to a person who's already maybe feels disenfranchised in his community, to then be out on the streets and doing something that they're forced to do, where they've had no choice base or understanding or exploration of what they want to do? And will the community really appreciate that? I don't know. It's a good conversation, though.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that anything that comes into that realm of, you know, where someone else is making the decision for you, for me, goes completely against the restorative process. You know, this is supposed to be a collaborative approach to the problem solving. And if we just kind of take the responsibility away from people who are involved in the process and say, this is what you're doing, then I think we're missing the point. But also that idea of, you know, the shame factor that people already feel, especially for people who are responsible parties, you know, and then you put them out in a uniform in the street that says you know, you've done something. It almost for me, the picture that comes to my mind is this idea of the chain gang. You know, it's there to shame you even further. Do you know what I mean? And it's putting you out in a, and I think, but from the premise that it's done from something that's supposed to be good, but the impact of it could have real negative consequences in terms of people who are involved in that. But maybe just in terms of wrapping this up, folks, is there anything anybody wants to add? And I think it's burning in your soul that you want to say before we call this we call this a day here. Silence, great. Okay. Listen, folks, I just want to say thanks very much. It's an absolute pleasure and a privilege to have had conversation with you, and for us just to share some of our thoughts and, you know, around this idea of repair and harm, and the fact that it is a challenging aspect. It is probably one of the most challenging aspects that we get in regards to how do we get to this point of, you know, coming up with things that will enable one, people to feel like, you know, that their accountability is there and that the actions being taken are actually deemed as those suitable responses to the incidents that they've been involved in. And hopefully, you know, this is maybe the start of an ongoing collaborative process between our organizations in regards to how we can maybe work together to try and help each other in that area as well. So folks, thank you very much for contributions. Absolutely delighted to be able to host this, and I look forward to what may come up in the future again, folks. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.